Most people think of silence as the absence of something, as though it's a void, an empty space where nothing happens. But silence, when experienced consciously, is not absence, it's presence. It is not a lack, it is a doorway. When you allow yourself to truly become silent, not just externally, but inwardly, you'll notice something begins to shift. And it's not small, it's foundational, because silence in its truest sense doesn't mute the world, it awakens your perception. We live in a time where stimulation is constant. From morning to night, the mind is bombarded images, sounds, opinions, messages, noise. The modern world teaches us to be loud to be relevant, to speak fast to seem intelligent, to share constantly to avoid being forgotten. But in the midst of all this noise, we've lost something essential, the capacity to see asterisk, not just with the eyes, but with attention, with presence, with the whole of our being. Now here's where silence becomes magnetic, because when you begin to let go of the addiction to noise, both outer and inner, you start to notice reality in a way that you haven't before. It's as if a layer of fog lifts and you realize you've been walking through life half asleep. Not because you didn't want to be awake, but because the volume was too loud to perceive the subtle. When you stop reacting to everything, when you don't jump to respond to every comment, when you resist the urge to explain yourself over and over, that's when you begin to really listen and not just to others, but to the deeper rhythms within yourself, the breath, the body, the quiet thoughts that don't scream for your attention. The patterns behind your own impulses, that is perception, that is intelligence, not the gathering of more information, but the refinement of attention. There's a certain kind of wisdom that can only emerge in stillness. You felt it, perhaps, in moments when words fell away. Maybe it was while watching the sunset, or walking alone in nature, or sitting beside someone in silence. In those moments, something ancient arises, a deeper knowing, and it's not always something you can put into language. But it transforms you nonetheless. The paradox is this: we keep trying to find answers through more talking, more reading, more external input. But often, the answers come only when we stop searching, when we create space, when we become quiet enough for truth to surface on its own. Like a pond that becomes still when the wind ceases, only then can you see what lies beneath the surface. The mind, when constantly stimulated, becomes reactive, but in silence it becomes receptive. A reactive mind wants to do something immediately, fix, judge, respond. A receptive mind, however, allows things to unfold, and in that allowing, insight is born. That's why many of the most powerful realizations come not in the midst of discussion, but afterward, in the silence that follows. This is not about becoming passive or mute. It's about becoming more aware, speaking when there is something true to say. Listening not just with the ears, but with the whole body, watching not just what others do, but how you respond inside, and choosing, again and again, to anchor yourself in awareness rather than impulse. Some people fear silence because it confronts them with themselves. Without the noise, the mind has no place to hide. You see your fears, your restlessness, your overthinking, your craving for validation. And that's uncomfortable, but it's also where transformation begins, because what you observe clearly, you can understand. And what you understand, you can let go of. But if you're always drowning in noise, you'll never reach that level of clarity. Letting go of noise is not a one-time event. It's a practice, a discipline, and it's often subtle. You might begin by not responding immediately to a message, or by choosing not to explain yourself when someone misunderstands you, or by pausing before you give your opinion. Each moment of restraint is a moment of power. not power over others, but mastery over yourself. And that self-mastery starts to reshape your presence. People notice. They may not be able to name it, but they feel it. You're not reacting like everyone else. You're not rushing to speak, to prove, to chase. Instead, there's a calm clarity in how you move, how you observe, how you respond, or choose not to. That kind of energy is magnetic. Not because you're trying to be mysterious, but because you are rooted. And rootedness is rare. In silence, you discover that not everything requires a reaction. Not every opinion needs a response. Not every emotion demands expression. You realize how much energy is wasted in unnecessary noise, and you begin to redirect that energy inward, toward awareness, toward growth, toward alignment. Suddenly, you're not scattered anymore, you're centered, and that center is powerful, because from it, you don't just see more clearly, you live more deliberately. You're no longer driven by compulsion, you act when it's time to act, you speak when there's something real to say. And the rest of the time, you remain still. That stillness becomes your anchor, your inner sanctuary. This is the hidden force of silence. It doesn't just affect you, it affects everything around you. Your relationships shift. Your decisions improve, your vision sharpens, you begin to attract different experiences not because you're doing more, but because you're being more. More present, more aware, more real. So the next time you're tempted to fill the space with words, pause. The next time you're reaching for your phone to distract yourself, pause. In that pause, listen, not just to the world, but to yourself. See what arises, see what's underneath the surface, because in that stillness, you may just find the very thing you've been looking for. Asterisk, when you stop chasing noise, you begin to notice the quiet truths that have been waiting patiently for your attention. And once you perceive them, you can never go back to sleep. Asterisk, most people associate strength with action, loud, visible, forceful action. We're taught from an early age that to be powerful means to speak up, to defend, to assert, to never be silent in the face of challenge. But that version of strength is only one layer, and often it's the least stable one, because true strength isn't always about expression. Often it's found in restraint. It's the stillness behind the storm, the space between the words. And when you begin to understand this, you realize power resides not in what you say, but in what you choose not to say. You can feel this when someone walks into a room and doesn't speak immediately, but you sense their presence. It's not about charisma or charm or even confidence in the way we usually define it. It's something deeper. It's the weight of someone who doesn't need to be loud to be heard, and that kind of energy, grounded, silent center, is far more magnetic than any clever speech. This is why silence is often misinterpreted. People assume that if you're quiet, you're uncertain or passive. But that's a misunderstanding rooted in insecurity. In reality, when you're able to remain silent in moments when the ego would normally rise up, when you don't justify, argue, prove, or defend, you're revealing a kind of strength that the ego cannot access. You're operating from a different place, a place of internal alignment, not emotional reaction. And this becomes especially powerful in conflict. When someone criticizes you, misjudges you, or provokes you, the automatic response is to react, to explain yourself, to restore your image. But what happens when you don't? What happens when you remain still, not because you're afraid, but because you know who you are and no longer feel the need to convince anyone else? You begin to notice something interesting. People don't know how to respond to that kind of silence. It unsettles them because it disrupts the game they're used to playing, the game of reaction and counter-reaction. Your stillness becomes a mirror in which their own noise is reflected, and in that mirror they either become more aware or they withdraw. But either way, you've maintained your center, and that in itself is mastery. There's a term in Eastern philosophy, *wu y*, which means effortless action or non-doing. It doesn't mean laziness or passivity. It means acting from alignment rather than resistance. And sometimes the most aligned action is no action at all. Sometimes silence is the sharpest response, because in that silence you're not feeding the chaos. You're not amplifying the noise, you're holding the energy rather than releasing it recklessly. This isn't easy. It requires training. It requires letting go of the ego's craving to be right, to be understood, to be validated. And letting go, as we know, is not a comfortable process. It requires trust that the truth doesn't need to be shouted to have impact. Trust that your stillness will speak in ways your words cannot. And here's the paradox: the less you need to prove your power, the more others feel it. Because real power isn't loud, it's undeniable. It doesn't have to announce itself. It doesn't need applause or recognition. It simply is, and the person who learns to hold that kind of energy quiet, contained, directed becomes a force. Not through domination, but through presence. Think of the mountain. It doesn't move, but everything around it changes. Storms come and go, winds rise and fall, but the mountain remains rooted. It doesn't argue with the weather. It doesn't justify its shape. It just is. And in its stillness, it becomes a symbol of endurance and strength. This is the kind of presence silence cultivates, not immobility, but unshakable calm, and this calm is not emotional numbness. It's not indifference, it's awareness without being consumed. It's the ability to hold your internal space sacred, and in doing so, you conserve energy. You stop bleeding your power into petty arguments, emotional outbursts, and constant verbal defense. You begin to gather your energy inward where it can mature, grow, and express itself with precision when needed. There is a difference between speaking and having something to say. The world is filled with people talking, but few are truly heard. Why? Because much of what is spoken is reaction, not realization. It's noise, not depth. But when someone who has cultivated inner silence chooses to speak, people listen. Because those words carry weight. They've been forged in stillness, not scattered in haste. So when you choose not to react, not out of fear, but from grounded clarity, you're building a foundation. You're teaching your nervous system that you're safe without needing to be defensive. You're showing your subconscious mind that stillness is not weakness, it's wisdom. And from this place, your actions become intentional rather than impulsive. The ancient masters often said, "He who knows does not speak, he who speaks does not know." At first glance, that sounds extreme, but the essence behind it is worth contemplating. It's not saying that silence is always superior. It's reminding us that knowledge, when deep enough, no longer needs external validation. It expresses itself through being not just speaking. Eventually, you begin to embody this more and more in daily life. You start choosing silence not because you don't have an answer, but because the answer isn't always necessary. You let others have the last word not because you've lost, but because you've risen above the need to win. And strangely, in doing so, you often gain something greater: peace, respect, and most importantly, self-mastery. So if you find yourself constantly reacting, constantly defending, constantly needing to be heard, pause. Ask yourself, is this strength, or is this insecurity wearing the mask of confidence? Could silence serve me better in this moment? Could letting go of this impulse actually bring me closer to the clarity I'm seeking? Asterisk asterisk, because in the end, power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes it says nothing at all, but you still feel it in every breath, every glance, every step. That is the power of silence, the strength of restraint, the calm within the storm. Choose it, and watch what begins to rise in its place. Asterisk asterisk, there comes a moment on the path of growth when you begin to see that much of what drives your speech, your need to explain, your impulse to be seen or heard, it doesn't come from clarity, it comes from the ego. The ego, by its very nature, is insecure. It depends on being perceived, praised, understood, validated, and when it feels threatened, it reaches for words like armor. It wants to protect the image it has built. It wants to control how others see us, and it will speak endlessly if it believes that will preserve its place. But the truth is, the more we speak from the ego, the less we're truly saying. There is a kind of deep liberation that begins to unfold when you start letting go of this compulsion. Not because you no longer have anything to say, but because you no longer need the world to confirm your value before you can feel it for yourself. That shift is profound. You're no longer performing, defending, or persuading. You're simply present. And in that presence, something extraordinary happens. The ego begins to dissolve. Now, this doesn't happen all at once. It's not a single choice, it's a slow unwinding. You begin to notice it in small moments when someone misinterprets you, and instead of rushing to correct them, you stay silent. Not out of weakness, but because you realize the need to be understood is no longer as strong as the peace you've cultivated within. Or perhaps someone criticizes you and you don't react. You hear them fully, even feel compassion for them, but you no longer identify with their opinion. You know who you are, and when that knowing is rooted in experience, not just belief, the ego loses its grip. The ego feeds on attention, and when you stop giving it constant reinforcement, when you choose silence instead of validation, you're starving the illusion. You're dismantling the need to be someone in the eyes of others. You're moving into a deeper dimension of being, where your value is not tied to how you're seen, but how you exist authentically, quietly, and fully aligned with yourself. And this is the irony: the less you strive to be recognized, the more people feel drawn to you. Not because you're projecting an image, but because you've dropped the image altogether. Your energy becomes lighter, more stable. You stop chasing and begin attracting, not through force, but through frequency. People can sense when they're in the presence of someone who isn't needy, who doesn't want anything from them, who isn't constantly grasping. That kind of presence is rare, and rare things are naturally magnetic. Letting go of the need to be heard is not silence in the sense of repression. You're not suppressing yourself, you're refining yourself. You're learning to speak only when speech is necessary, when it flows from depth rather than from the need to fill space. And when that happens, your words carry a different weight. They're not just sounds strung together. They have a vibration, they land differently, they move people not because they're loud, but because they're real. You begin to realize that most people aren't truly listening anyway. They're just waiting for their turn to speak. Conversations become a series of projected identities rather than shared presence. But when you stop participating in that unconscious game, when you bring your full awareness into the moment without needing to dominate it, you shift the entire interaction. Your silence invites presence in others. Your stillness becomes a mirror, gently reflecting what others may not yet be ready to see in themselves. And this has practical power. You become less reactive in difficult conversations. You don't need to win every argument. You can let things go, not because you've lost your voice, but because you've found your peace. You start to choose peace over pride, clarity over control. And this doesn't mean you become passive or invisible. On the contrary, you become more visible, more influential, because your energy is no longer fragmented by egoic tension. It's integrated. The more the ego dissolves, the more space you create within yourself. Space for insight. Space for stillness. Space for authentic response rather than habitual reaction. You're no longer driven by the need to be liked or right or admired. You're no longer trapped in the exhausting cycle of performance, and in this freedom you start to live more honestly. You no longer betray your own truth for the sake of approval. You don't dilute yourself just to be accepted. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to recognize this same ego-driven pattern in others, not to judge them, but to understand them. You see that when someone lashes out, brags, interrupts, defends, manipulates, it's not strength, it's fear. And that recognition breeds compassion. You stop taking things personally. You see the game for what it is, and you no longer feel the need to play it. Instead, you become a presence that invites stillness, that holds space, that listens, and in a world starving for real connection, that is a gift. You're no longer reacting, you're responding, you're not projecting, you're perceiving, and the more you rest in that space, the more others feel safe to drop their masks around you. You don't need them to see you a certain way, and in not needing it, you become more fully seen. This is the paradox of silence. The more you let go of the need to be heard, the more deeply you begin to hear. You hear the unspoken language of energy, of intent, of presence. You pick up on things others miss, not because you're hypervigilant, but because you're tuned in. You're not lost in your own narrative anymore. You're aware, open, receptive. So when you notice that inner urge to explain yourself, to jump in, to correct, to prove, pause. Ask yourself, who is speaking? What am I trying to protect? What am I trying to gain? And more importantly, can I let that go? Because the moment you let go of the need to be heard, you begin to touch something far greater than the ego's fleeting victories. You begin to taste freedom, and that freedom is not loud. It doesn't need to be. It's simply asterisk is asterisk. Asterisk asterisk. Only when you stop trying to be someone do you become everything you were meant to be. Let go and allow silence to show you who you truly are. Asterisk asterisk. There's a certain kind of silence that isn't empty. It's asterisk charged asterisk. It carries a presence that others can feel, even if they can't explain it. You walk into a room, and without saying a word, the atmosphere shifts. Not because you're trying to dominate or intimidate, but because you've become deeply rooted within yourself. That internal stillness, that settled energy, it radiates. It speaks louder than anything you could say. This is the silent force we often overlook. The energetic magnetism of someone who no longer needs to speak to be felt. To understand this, we must recognize that we are always communicating, even in silence. In fact, silence reveals what words often conceal. It uncovers your baseline energy, your state of being when there's nothing to perform, nothing to defend, nothing to prove. And this state, this non-verbal, non-reactive, centered presence, is what others truly respond to. Most people walk into a space wanting to be noticed. They fill the air with noise, hoping to be acknowledged, but when you're operating from a deeper place, that desire fades. You're no longer looking outward for significance, you've found it inward, and so your very presence begins to carry a different frequency, not one of craving, but one of completion. People feel this difference. They may not be able to articulate it, but something in them relaxes around you, or sometimes becomes unsettled because stillness confronts what's noisy inside of them. This is why silence, when embodied, is not passive. It's powerful because it holds, it anchors, it reflects, and it invites others into the same state, whether they're ready for it or not. You may have experienced this yourself. Have you ever been in the presence of someone who didn't say much, but somehow made you feel more aware, more conscious of your words, your energy, your thoughts? That wasn't an accident, that was resonance. Energy is contagious, and silence, when rooted in depth, is a transmitter of high energy. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't wait for the right moment. It simply is asterisk, and it begins affecting others the moment it enters the space. Not because you're projecting anything, but because you've stopped leaking. You're no longer scattering your focus. You've become consolidated, contained, collected. This containment is often misunderstood. People associate energy with activity, fast speech, wide gestures, constant engagement. But true energy, life force, is most potent when it's concentrated. Think of a laser. Its power comes from focus, not size. The same applies to presence. When your energy is gathered inward rather than spilled outward through compulsive expression, it creates a field around you. That field influences without effort. It draws people in, not because of what you do, but because of who you are when you've stopped trying to be anything else. And here's where we start to see the connection between silence and magnetism. The less reactive you are, the more others begin to notice their own reactivity. Your stillness becomes a contrast. When you no longer rush to interrupt, no longer fill the space with your opinions, no longer need to prove your worth, those around you feel both confronted and invited. They sense a deeper rhythm, a slower pace, a different standard of presence, and they either resist it or begin to match it. What we often overlook is that humans are deeply sensitive to vibration, whether they acknowledge it or not. You can say all the right things, but if your energy is chaotic, people will feel it. On the other hand, you can say very little, but if your energy is stable, grounded, clean, people will trust it. They'll lean into it, because in a world of scattered minds and hyperactive nervous systems, stability is rare. And what is rare becomes valuable. But this kind of presence doesn't come from pretending to be silent. It doesn't come from artificially lowering your voice or avoiding eye contact. It comes from a genuine inner stillness, a mind that is not racing, a heart that is not striving, a body that is not tense. And to reach that state, you must practice letting go. Again and again, letting go of the need to impress, to control, to chase outcomes. You must practice returning to your center, not once, but daily. This is why many great traditions speak of energy before they speak of technique. Because it doesn't matter how eloquent your words are, how refined your movements, how polished your image. If your energy is unsettled, it will reveal itself. Silence, real silence, requires that you've done the inner work to become empty of noise, not empty in the sense of hollow, but empty in the sense of pure. No excess, no pretending, no resistance. From this place you begin to live differently. You're no longer trying to influence through persuasion. You influence through vibration. You don't need to shout to be heard. Your stillness becomes your signature. And what's fascinating is that the more rooted you become in silence, the more you begin to notice subtleties. Micro-expressions, shifts in tone, discrepancies between what people say and what they mean. Because you're no longer distracted by your own performance, your awareness opens. Your perception expands. This opens up a new kind of intelligence, not academic, not intellectual, but intuitive. You begin to feel more, you notice what's behind the mask, you speak less but understand more, and in this space you become a source of clarity for others. Not because you solve their problems, but because your silence invites them to hear themselves more clearly. That is the quiet power of presence. It's not about withdrawing from the world, it's about entering it fully without being consumed by it. You speak when it's time to speak. You act when it's time to act, but the rest of the time you observe. You hold space, you emanate calm, and through this quiet, grounded way of being, you affect change in a way that words never could. So if you find yourself constantly trying to be seen, trying to be heard, trying to influence through force, pause. Step back, bring your energy inward, let silence do the work, let your presence become your message. Asterisk, because when your silence is rooted in depth, it doesn't push, it pulls. It doesn't chase, it attracts. And that kind of energy, once embodied, changes not only how others see you, but how you see the world. Asterisk in relationships, whether romantic, familial, professional, or even fleeting encounters, there is often a subtle tension that goes unnoticed. It's the tension of expectation, of emotional holding, of trying to control how the other person feels, behaves, or perceives us. And most of this tension is rooted in attachment. We think closeness means holding tightly. We believe love means constantly explaining, proving, or correcting. But the deeper truth is this: when you learn to let go, not of care, not of presence, but of control, you invite something far more authentic into the relationship. And paradoxically, that detachment doesn't weaken connection, it strengthens it. Silence plays a vital role here. Not the kind of silence that punishes or distances, but the kind that arises from inner clarity. When you're no longer reactive, no longer grasping for validation or steering the emotional direction of the other person, you create space. Space for the relationship to breathe. And in that breathing room, clarity arises not just for you, but for the other as well. People begin to feel seen, not managed. They feel heard, not analyzed, because your silence is not an absence. It's a non-intrusive presence. A presence that holds, but does not control. Letting go in this way doesn't mean becoming cold or detached emotionally. It doesn't mean giving up on people. It means you stop trying to fix, to mold, to save, or to be saved. You allow others the dignity of their own experience, just as you protect your own peace, and what arises from this is not distance, it's a cleaner form of intimacy. It's connection without entanglement. But to reach this level of relational maturity, you must first observe your own patterns honestly. Why do you speak when you speak? Are you trying to control an outcome? Are you trying to protect your image? Are you afraid of silence because it might create discomfort? The ego doesn't like gaps in conversation. It fears being misunderstood. It resists letting others sit with their own emotions, so it rushes to explain, to fix, to fill the air. But the wise don't speak just to soothe the discomfort of silence. They allow space for understanding to ripen on its own. This doesn't mean you withhold your voice. It means your voice becomes more refined, more aligned. You no longer speak to manipulate perception or soothe your own anxiety. You speak when the words arise from a clear place. The rest of the time, you remain silent not as a tactic, but as a natural outcome of inner stillness. And what happens in relationships when you practice this kind of silence? You stop reacting to every mood shift. You stop personalizing every word or withdrawal. You see the other person more clearly because your own ego isn't blocking the view. You become less entangled in their emotional currents because you've stopped clinging to the need for control. And in this space, the relationship either deepens or reveals its limits. Sometimes we fear letting go because we think it will make the other person feel unwanted. But more often than not, it does the opposite. It frees them. It allows them to come forward voluntarily rather than out of obligation or pressure. When someone senses you are not trying to possess them, they are more willing to be vulnerable. When they sense you are not emotionally reactive, they trust your stability. And this builds the foundation of something real. It's important to understand that detachment is not indifference. It is precision, it is clarity, it's knowing where you end and the other begins. It's refusing to carry what isn't yours and releasing the burden of making someone else's growth your responsibility. This is true compassion, not codependency dressed in concern, but love that honors the freedom of both beings. Of course, this doesn't mean relationships become effortless. It means they become intentional. Your silence becomes an offering, an invitation to depth. When you stop forcing closeness, intimacy can arise organically. When you stop rushing to explain yourself, others have the space to reach their own understanding. When you stop chasing connection, the connection that remains is real. There's a quiet confidence that comes with this practice. You realize you don't have to constantly manage how others see you. You don't have to keep convincing someone of your worth. You don't have to keep repairing a bond that's only surviving through control. You learn to trust. Trust that what is meant for you won't require force. Trust that presence, not pressure, is the real measure of love. And trust that silence, when it comes from grounded awareness, is often more honest than words. It's a shift from neediness to wholeness, from reaction to observation, from clinging to holding space. And once you taste this level of peace in your relationships, the old patterns lose their appeal. You no longer want to play emotional chess. You no longer need to win arguments. You realize that peace is more valuable than being right, and presence is more nourishing than performance. Letting go in this way will sometimes lead people to drift away. Not everyone is ready for this kind of clarity. But that's not your burden to carry. Your role is not to convince anyone to stay. It's to remain rooted in truth and allow what is aligned to remain and what is false to fall away. When you operate from this place, your relationships become more honest even if fewer. But those that remain are based on mutual respect, not manipulation. Presence, not performance. Stillness, not struggle. So observe your interactions. Notice where you're holding on too tightly. Notice where your words are trying to control outcomes, and then practice silence, not as a wall, but as a window. A window that allows light to enter on its own. Let others come to their own realizations. Let yourself breathe. Let the relationship unfold without constant interference. Asterisk, because when you stop trying to hold everything together with words, you discover that the truth doesn't fall apart in silence. It becomes more visible, and the connections that remain, they are the ones that can breathe in your stillness and still stay. Asterisk, there's a point on the journey where you begin to realize that all your effort, all your grasping, all your pushing against the flow of life has been getting in the way. It's subtle because at first it looks like discipline, like ambition, like striving for alignment. But underneath much of that effort is a quiet fear, a fear that if you don't keep moving, if you don't keep speaking, explaining, chasing, controlling, nothing will happen. You'll be forgotten, you'll miss your moment, life will pass you by. But what if that's not how things actually work? Silence teaches us that the universe doesn't respond to force, it responds to frequency, and frequency isn't something you can fake. It's not about how loud you are, how often you repeat your desires, or how convincingly you speak your affirmations. Frequency is your state, it's what you embody in stillness, and that stillness becomes magnetic when you finally stop clinging and start trusting. Letting go is often misunderstood. People think it means giving up, becoming passive, sitting back and waiting for life to rescue you. But that's not letting go, that's resignation. True letting go is not inaction, it's intelligent non-resistance. It's stepping out of the way, not because you've lost hope, but because you've realized your control was the very thing blocking the flow. When you release the need to dictate how and when things should happen, something begins to shift, internally first, then externally. The inner tension loosens, the mind stops fighting time, and you start to notice things you missed before, opportunities, signs, intuitive nudges. Not because they weren't there before, but because your inner noise was too loud to hear them. In silence, you begin to listen, not just with your ears, but with your entire being. This is where synchronicity begins. You meet the right person at the right moment. A door opens just as you stop looking for one. A decision that seemed impossible suddenly becomes clear. These aren't coincidences, they're reflections of a deeper harmony between your internal state and the external world. When you're aligned, life becomes responsive. And silence, intentional silence, is one of the most powerful tools for cultivating that alignment. The mind loves certainty. It wants a plan, a guarantee, a timeline, but the soul grows in the unknown. And silence invites you into that space, into the empty moments where the ego has nothing to hold onto. And it's in that emptiness that something real is born, not manufactured, not manipulated, born. It's difficult at first. We've been conditioned to believe that more effort equals more progress, that the louder we are, the more visible we become, that we have to chase what we want, or it will move further away. But many truths in life are paradoxes. The more you chase, the more you push it away. The more you grasp, the more it slips through your fingers. But when you stop needing, when you let go, not from fear, but from faith, the very thing you've been seeking begins to seek you. It's not magic, it's not mystical, it's alignment. When you let go, you're not sending a message to the world that you've given up. You're sending a message that you're ready to receive, and that receiving doesn't come through noise. It comes through quiet readiness. People ask, what if I miss my moment? But the truth is, the moment can't miss you when you're fully present. Silence puts you in the now, not projecting forward, not analyzing backward, and from that place, the universe can finally reach you. Not through force, but through invitation. This is why the greatest changes in life often come after surrender. You've done the work, you've shown up, you've tried all the strategies, and nothing moves, until one day you stop trying. You breathe, you rest, you let go, and that's when it happens. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped interfering. The same principle applies in creativity, in love, in healing. Sometimes the most profound breakthroughs come not from pushing harder, but from stepping back and allowing space. Silence isn't absence, it's preparation, a clearing, a reset. It recenters you so that life can meet you where you truly are, not where your mind is desperately trying to be. And here's what's fascinating. Once you experience this shift, even once, it becomes a new reference point. You begin to trust that silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It often means something is happening, just not in the way you expected. There's a deeper intelligence at work, and it doesn't operate on the timeline of your impatience. Letting go, in this sense, becomes a practice. A daily surrender, not of your dreams, not of your direction, but of your grip. You stop controlling how the outcome must look. You stop performing for life, and instead, you start living it. You move with rhythm, not resistance. You listen more than you speak. You act from alignment, not urgency. And as you do this, your energy changes. It becomes calmer, clearer, quieter, and people feel that. Life responds to that. You start noticing that things begin to flow, not always easily, but more naturally. You're no longer swimming upstream, you're moving with the current, and in that current, there's a kind of peace that effort could never offer you. You begin to understand you're not here to force life to bend to your will, you're here to align with something deeper. And silence chosen, conscious silence, sees one of the clearest paths back to that alignment. So the next time you feel the urge to chase, to push, to speak just to fill the void, pause, step back, breathe, listen, let go of the timeline, let go of the pressure, let go of the noise. Asterisk asterisk, because when you stop forcing life to move, life starts moving toward you, not because you chased it, but because you finally made space for it to arrive. Asterisk asterisk.